today, reality bites Donald Trump in the you-know-where. If the price of eggs propelled Donald Trump to victory in November, then his man-made economic instability, which has rattled markets and ushered in unease for American consumers, may very well be his political undoing. A wave of new polls show that both Donald Trump's approval ratings and voters' opinions of his handling of the economy are today in free fall. The New York Times average of polls shows this, quote, Trump's approval rating has sunk to about 45%. That's down from 52% 1 week after he took office. Voters' views of his handling of the economy are even lower than his overall approval rating. A Fox News poll out last night puts his approval on the economy at 38%. As for his handling of inflation and tariffs, just 33% of Americans approve of that. And for the first time since the year 2001, a majority of Americans say their personal finances are getting worse. So, see, it turns out the more voters see of Donald Trump's man-made chaos, the less they like it. And there is a lot of chaos. As the New York Times reports on major economic decisions, Trump blinks and then blinks again. As we reported on this show yesterday, Donald Trump threatened to fire Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, then changed his mind and backed off that threat. After slapping so-called reciprocal tariffs on every country and every island in the world, even those inhabited only by penguins, he reversed himself on that and announced a pause on those, too. As for China, which is subject to a 145% tariff, Trump says, well, now they're negotiating. Watch.
We are going to have a fair deal with China. It's going to be fair.
Are you talking to them actively now?
Actively. Everything's active. Everybody wants to be a part of what we're doing.
The Chinese government says no, not active. Quote, China and the U.S. have not engaged in any consultations or negotiations regarding tariffs, let alone reached an agreement, end quote. Adding that while China is open to talks, quote, if it's a fight, we will fight till the end. Confronted with China pouring cold water on Donald Trump's version of reality, Trump said this.
A question on China. Can you clarify with whom the U.S. is speaking with China? They're saying it's fake news that trade talks are happening.
Well, they had a meeting this morning, so I can't tell you. It doesn't matter who they is.
They just doesn't include China and the U.S., according to China. New York Times reports this, quote, in private, some Trump officials concede that they did not accurately predict China's reaction. Trump seemed to expect China to be among the first to come begging for relief, given the size of its exports to the U.S. Now, though, the cost of all of it, the price we as Americans and as a country are paying for Trump's incompetence and delusions as he stumbles on what was once his political calling card, the economy, is in part our image, our reputation, our history as a safe place to invest in and a reliable player and partner on the world stage. Take a look at the cover of The Economist. Quote, only 1,361 days to go, showing America's national symbol, the bald eagle, battered and injured and bandaged. A top Trump MAGA donor puts it this way. Our national brand is at risk. Take a listen to
America
that.
rose beyond just being a country. It was like an aspiration for most of the world. And we're eroding that brand right now. And if you think of your behavior as a consumer, how many times do you buy a product with a brand on it because you trust that brand? In the financial markets, no brand compared to the brand of the U.S. Treasuries. U.S. Treasury market, the strength of the U.S. dollar and the strength the creditworthiness of U.S. Treasuries. No brand came close. We put that brand at risk. And as you and I both know, it can take a very long time to remove the tarnish on a brand. So the president and the Secretary of Treasury and the Secretary of Commerce need to be very thoughtful that when you have a brand, you need to behave in a way that respects that brand, that strengthens that brand. Because when you tarnish that brand, it can be a lifetime to repair the damage that has been done.
The economic and political price of Donald Trump's stumbles on the economy is where we start today. Joining us now, U.S. financial commentator for the Financial Times, writer of the Unhedged newsletter, Robert Armstrong is here. Also joining us, Sarah Longwell. She's publisher of The Bulwark, host of the podcast, The Focus Group. And with me at the table for the hour, anchor and correspondent for Bloomberg News, David Gura. Sarah Longwell, let me start with you and the public's experience of Donald Trump's erratic behavior around economic policy. What has sunk in?
I mean, the main thing that has sunk in is that maybe Donald Trump doesn't know exactly what he's doing. Look, the fact is, when it comes to why a lot of voters, not all of them, not, the hardcore MAGA people, but there was another major slice of the Trump voting coalition that were people who just wanted things to cost less, right? They were upset about inflation. They were upset about the cost of housing. And they heard Donald Trump promise to lower the price of groceries and that he was going to lower the cost of everything. It was going to be so easy and so fast. And when you listen to voters and focus groups, they say not only are things not getting better, but it feels like they're getting worse. And the level of uncertainty that they feel, and that is it. I really want to, it's the uncertainty that you can hear from people. You'll get some who are, they're still fans of Donald Trump, but they're kind of like, boy, I hope this works out. I'm not sure. But then you get other people, especially people who are cost constrained, who are at the lower end of the income spectrum. And those people notice every dollar and the way any price that goes up. And so from those voters who heard the promise that Trump was going to lower costs, who thought he was a businessman, who knew what he was doing, and is now watching this chaos and not seeing their prices go down, they are starting to lose faith that he's going to be able to keep the promises that he made to them.
Sarah, you and I had a lot of conversations in the run-up to the November election day, talking about how, who could break through to people? Could generals make the argument? And they finally, in the closing days of the campaign, spoke out about who Trump was. They said he was, quote, fascist to the core. I think that no one would have ever been cynical enough to want people to experience any economic insecurity, instability, or rising prices, right? It's not a thought exercise because too many people's lives and livelihoods and sense of their place in the world is at risk. But Donald Trump has done that experience for us. And I think if we go into the numbers, he's never had a 33% approval on any economic question. I don't think he even had that during the pandemic when the disapproval was for supply chain issues, which people didn't completely blame him for. The world was shut down. The world streets were empty. And 38% is his overall approval on the economy. Has he ever been here before politically?
He's never been here before, but part of the reason he's never been here before is that with the exception of COVID, where people recognized a major exogenous event occurring, Donald Trump's strength, his central mythology was this idea that he was a businessman. And in that first term before COVID hit, he had a very strong economy and he kept running it hot. And so what you're seeing right now is people experiencing negative personal consequences as the result of the decisions that Donald Trump is making. And so when Donald Trump's strength, the thing that people count on him the most for, there's two things. One, that he will handle immigration well, and two, that he will handle the economy well, although they're flipped. They want the economy first, immigration second. And right now, he is failing on both of those fronts, and you're seeing his numbers drop on both of those fronts. And when you go at his strengths, at the central things people elected him to do, and people feel like he's failing on those fronts, especially because he keeps deporting people wrongly, and he keeps crashing the stock market, and prices of things are going up. Inflation's not coming down. He made promises he couldn't keep. That is a recipe for Donald Trump to get into really negative territory really fast. We have never seen somebody in the first 100 days. I mean, presidents enjoy a honeymoon period. The bottom usually starts to fall out sometime in the summer. Donald Trump has managed to crater every advantage he had before the first 100 days are up.
We talk a lot as well about message delivery in the manosphere and the blogosphere and the podosphere and the spherosphere and all that stuff, message delivery. It feels like we're in a lived experience chapter of our politics. How much influence do influencers even have in the political arena right now, Sarah?
Well, they actually do have some. Look, I want to make an argument for offense right now. Look, Donald Trump wanted to make the case that the problems in the economy were Joe Biden's fault. And I think that Yes, people do not believe that, and they don't believe it in part because Donald Trump has made it such a signature, the tariffs especially, such a signature of what he's doing. But look, you've got to be able to press your advantage. You've got to go on offense. You've got to say Trump is doing this. And I think people have been doing a better job of making him own this. And then especially where this has mattered is on immigration. You know, I think there were some politicians who said, look, don't talk about these wrongful deportations because, you know, Trump is so strong on immigration and it'll just be a distraction. That is wrong. OK, pressing on this, pressing on the rule of law components on this, on the fact that he's defying the Supreme Court, that has mattered. Donald Trump's numbers are falling precipitously on his handling of immigration. And so I think people need to start realizing that people are so afraid of Trump. Don't be afraid of Donald Trump. Go on offense. Help the American people understand why this is happening and whose fault it is. And I think you will continue to see Donald Trump's numbers decline because he is making so many catastrophically bad decisions.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump is unpopular. He's trying to force through an unpopular agenda and kind of hoping no one notices. But sometimes, once in a while, he gets caught and he has to retreat. Well, today's one of those days. Last night on this very program, we brought you this story, a story about the Trump administration announcing they were going to gut the Women's Health Initiative, a groundbreaking 30-year study into preventative health care for postmenopausal women. It's funded by the NIH, National Institutes of Health. It costs only about, get this, $10 million a year in the trillions of dollars in the federal budget. Now, the Women's Health Initiative has done a bunch of really important research on subjects like breast cancer and heart disease and osteoporosis. By the government's own estimate, it has saved countless lives and billions of dollars in medical costs. But Trump and Elon Musk tried to end it. And last night, we put a spotlight on that and we asked, who exactly voted for this? Well, it turns out no one did. After spotlighting that story, lo and behold, get this. Administration reversed course, announcing today they're going to keep funding the study. Federal officials saying, don't worry. Yeah, don't worry about that. Now, if only the same could be said for many of the other countless destructive budget cuts, like just for instance, eliminating inexplicably funding for National History Day, a competition where middle and high school kids share their love of history. But fundamentally, what they're banking on is that they're doing so much in so many different parts of the government that are so destructive, no one could just pay attention to all this stuff, right? It's going to go past most voters. Because what they are actually doing is really unpopular. Now, the key here is that Donald Trump wants you to believe desperately that he is popular. It's all part of the con. Just because he managed to win a plurality of voters, which he did, with very poor approval ratings and 4 criminal cases tailing him, including a conviction in state court. And he did manage to win the popular vote, unlike in 2016. It's the first time in 3 tries. But all of a sudden, after that victory, the conventional wisdom quickly congealed that America was Trump country, that he was a political colossus. Remember, the guy won by about 1.5 points, hardly a landslide. He was inaugurated with basically the highest approval rating that he has ever had, which also happened to be the second lowest approval rating ever for a new president, topped only by himself the first time around. He has never been very popular. And his approval rating has only gone down since. Nate Silver tracks the average over on his Substack. Full disclosure, some of the graphs on that site are really difficult to show on TV. They require lots of explanation. This ain't one of them. See that there? You can see what that's doing. The line just keeps going down. Even Fox News has no choice but to face this reality.
If you look at our new Fox News poll at 100 days job approval compared to other presidents, there you see the president at 44%, and you see his first term at 45% at this mark, the 100-day mark. We have other new polls that are revealing some concerns about the economy.
Boy, that's a tough graphic if you're Donald Trump sitting in the White House watching Fox News all day. That's the kind of clip that really gets Donald Trump yelling at the TV. In fact, he's now calling for Fox's pollster to be fired. Also says the Wall Street Journal sucks. We're not even 100 days in, and Trump is already at the polls are fake stage. But again, they show what they show, even at the granular level, right? When you dive into it and you look through the numbers, you break his approval rating down by issue. things don't get any better for him. I mean, he is underwater on basically everything. Let's start with the economy. That's supposed to be Trump's bread and butter. Traditionally, it's been his biggest strength. That same Fox News poll has 56% of voters approving of Trump's handling of the economy. 38 approve. Underwater by 18 points. And it's not hard to see why. He ran on making things cheaper on day one. That was his promise. But maybe you've noticed things are not cheaper. They are not. Instead, he started a trade war, tanked the stock market, is about to make everything more expensive. A new Reuters Ipsos poll shows disapproval of Trump's handling specifically on the cost of living at 57%. That Fox poll shows him with a 59% disapproval rating on inflation and a 58% disapproval rating on tariffs. A new Pew poll has disapproval of the tariffs at 59%. The data here is real crystal clear, right? Keep in mind, and this is key, stuff hasn't even really started to get more expensive yet. The fallout from the tariffs takes time. There's a delayed reaction before we start seeing shortages and price hikes. Now, if that happens, it's sort of an interesting question about what happens to Trump's numbers. Can they go lower? Can they break through the previous floor? But here's the thing. It is not just the economy, even on immigration, right? Where he likes to pretend the country is just overwhelmingly united on his side. He's slipping. A bunch of recent polls show him underwater on issues of immigration, ranging from about a point to as much as 5 points. That was not the case a month or 2 months ago. That Fox News poll provides some interesting insights because when voters were asked about border security, Trump is doing very well. But when they were asked about immigration at large, look at that. His approval was underwater. That, I think, is due to his neglect of due process. The stories of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the young graduate students here totally legally who've done nothing wrong at colleges, getting abducted off the street and put into prison, or the people deported to a foreign gulag with no trial because they had an autism awareness tattoo. Not very popular. Look at this, okay? A new Economist YouGov poll. Half of all Americans say Trump should return Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the U.S. Only 28% say he should not. Even Trump's so-called war on woke, that was a key component of his campaign and a huge part of what they're doing in the government, even that is underwater. Look at this. His attacks on DEI, which are really attacks on civil rights law, are unpopular. He's down 9 points on the issue, according to one poll. Now, instead of changing course, Trump is doing more of what voters say they dislike. In fact, yesterday, he signed an executive order that seeks to just straight up annihilate a key provision of the Civil Rights Act. He's basically ordering the federal government to ignore what's called disparate impact. That's when some institution does something that on paper may look neutral, but in practice ends up discriminating disproportionately against one group or other. It's part of the original Civil Rights Act. It's a bedrock civil rights principle. It's something that Martin Luther King Jr. and the people of that generation marched for, that they died to protect in this country. Trump signs an order wanting to undo it. Now, I will say, to be fair, when he signed the order last night, it sure did seem like he was hearing about it for the first time.
Lastly, sir, we have an executive order on disparate impact theory. This is a theory that underlies a lot of the modern DEI and CRT-driven diversity culture. The basic idea here is instructing your departments and agencies to no longer rely on disparate impact theory as they're regulating, as they're issuing guidance, as they're making rules. We want to focus on results. We want to focus on actual fairness. We want to focus on merit, not things like disparate impact theory and the whole sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion cult.
It's getting out of that, huh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, he seems to have total command. I don't think this stuff plays well with anyone. Again, I don't want to overstate the case here, right? Like, we're a very polarized country. Trump just won an election that, by all rights, I think it was preposterous he won, but he won. There's enduring popularity among his base. But again, Trump keeps acting like he has a huge mandate. In reality, he is unpopular at basically every turn. Because here's the thing, and this is really key, and we've seen this now a few times. So whatever skills he has at marketing and branding, and they are considerable, one has to say, he does not have the same skills for governing. Turns out people bought the packaging, but once again, we're all reminded the product inside sucks. The only thing keeping him afloat is an agenda of intimidation and fear that enforces a politically toxic kind of discipline among Republicans in Washington. They feel they have to go along with his unpopular agenda. But I think, not guaranteed, I think it's going to catch up to them eventually. Because fundamentally, right, look at those numbers, look at where the country's at. They don't have the American people on their side right now. And I think the data is pretty definitive on that.
I want to bring back NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez and Ned Price as well. Ned, one of the things that he said was the next couple of days are going to be very important. And as he lays out the deal, on one side, you have Russia that gets Crimea and the 20% of Ukraine that they currently occupy. When asked about the other side, what was in it for Ukraine, he said they're stopping the taking of the whole country. He also thought, and again, this is quoting him, I think they will accept. Do you hear a deal there that's acceptable?
Chris, let's be clear about what we just heard. It was a lot of bluster and a lot of lies. And I'm glad you started where you did, because I think one of the most pernicious lies that we just heard was this idea that President Trump is putting pressure on President Putin. President Trump is right that he is exerting a strategy of carrots and sticks. The problem is that it's all carrots for Russia and it's all sticks for Ukraine. And I say that because going back to the start of this process, you might recall, I'm sure you recall, President Zelensky's visit to that very room, the Oval Office, when he was berated by President Trump, thrown out of the White House. And after that, the administration halted security assistance. It halted the provision of intelligence information that, by the way, had a practical impact on the ground, and it cost Ukrainian lives, and it allowed Russia to carry forward its advance. On the other hand, with Russia, they are indeed using carrots. There is a prospect of sanctions relief. There's a prospect of U.S. recognition of Crimea, again, something that only a rogues gallery of countries around the world have done. There's the prospect of essentially recognizing all of the territorial gains that Russia has made since 2022. That's about 20% of Ukrainian territory. So President Trump might think this is the basis for a deal. President Putin might think this is the basis for a deal, because indeed it would be a very favorable deal for him. The problem is that this would not be a just peace. This would be, again, capitulation. This would be appeasement rather than peace, and it would do nothing but incentivize President Putin and dictators and wannabe dictators the world over to attempt to undertake the same type of territorial aggression that has cost Ukraine so much in terms of blood and treasure, and that, by the way, has cost the United States and so many of our allies and partners so much in terms of treasure that will be replicated time and again if this were to go forward.
Ned, as you well know, a lot of Democrats felt pretty good about the fact that Marco Rubio was going to be the Secretary of State. They voted for him. They voted to confirm him. You heard what he had to say. He said, listen, he's the only leader who is talking about peace. He's the only leader who is pushing for peace. Is he right about that?
Well, look, I think the nomination and ultimately the confirmation of Secretary Rubio with a unanimous vote is going to go down as a historic mistake on the part of those who voted for him. And I understand that he was a practically minded senator, but he has proven to be anything but in terms of his time in office. And just earlier this week, he railed against the deep state and pockets of radicals within the State Department, just really echoing these MAGA talking points that, frankly, I think he knows better than to repeat. And I think even more concerningly, he is really embracing President Trump's substantive positions on issues that he would have rejected 3 months ago, certainly 3 years ago, on issues like Crimea. And in fact, his own State Department's website, as of about 3 hours ago, states very clearly that Crimea belongs to Ukraine and the United States will never, never recognize otherwise. And yet you see Secretary Rubio on the couch in the Oval Office really seconding everything the president has said. Again, we all want to see this war come to an end. It is a question of when it comes to an end, but it's also a question of how it comes to an end. And Senator Rubio would have known that a peace deal that provides Russia everything it wanted and deprived Ukraine of everything it needs and everything it has is not a recipe for peace. It's a recipe for further aggression. And he would have understood the fact that it represented that for President Putin of Russia, but also people like President Xi of China, who would see that as a green light to move forward with their most ambitious territorial acquisitions that in some cases they've harbored for years on end.
And Gabe, we know that these latest attacks from Russia on Ukraine that killed 12 people angered or at least upset President Trump. We saw it in his Twitter where he said, Vladimir, stop. Also asked about it, he said, you have no idea what pressure I'm putting on Russia. Traditional pressure might be something like sanctions, but any insight in Donald Trump's administration about what that pressure is or looks like?
Well, Chris, I want to go back to something you just zeroed in on, and you're right to really focus on this headline with Donald Trump speaking about what concessions Russia should make, what you were discussing with Ned. Chris, about back in February during when India's prime minister visited the White House, I asked the president back then, what should Russia give up? Back then, he didn't give a direct answer, and he really hasn't thus far. So I do think it is very significant that he is now pointing to this idea that the concession on the part of Russia would be simply to stop the war and not take any territory. That is very significant given the context of the last couple of days with President Zelensky basically saying that it's a non-starter. They will not recognize the territory that Russia seized illegally in Crimea. That won't work. And from being in Ukraine, I can tell you, many Ukrainians say that that just will not happen. Now, the president somehow seems to think that any peace deal that would have to involve the recognition of Crimea, if not perhaps in Ukraine, perhaps the United States. But there are a lot of questions about how he's going to get to yes from both sides here. You mentioned the president did say he was not happy with the attacks overnight, that Russia that were underway in Kyiv overnight on behalf of Russia. And you heard Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that that wasn't going in the right direction. But as you were speaking about with Ned, at this point, it is hard to see exactly what pressure President Trump is placing on Vladimir Putin. At least publicly, we just haven't seen it other than some social media posts, Chris.
Gabe Gutierrez and Ned Price, gentlemen, thank you.
Let's begin with NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, business and data correspondent Brian Chung, and professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan, Justin Wolfers. Garrett, so is there progress with China or not?
I think it's unclear, Anna, but the signs point to no, if I were to shake my magic 8-ball on this. Where we are right now is you have the president saying repeatedly that there are some level of talks going on between the United States and China. Meanwhile, his Treasury Secretary, his top economic advisor, and the Chinese say that's not true. So while there may be kind of a narrow, technically accurate way to say that at some level, there are always conversations ongoing between the two largest economies in the world. There's no particular indication that any of those conversations are leading anywhere that will end in the tariffs being lowered. And that's really what this is all about. The White House is very keen to show progress across the board, that they're getting somewhere by using these tariffs as a negotiating tactic. And the Chinese, for their part, are saying that may be true, but you're not getting anywhere with us.
Brian, the markets keep spiking and then they're sinking, all based on these impromptu comments that we keep hearing from President Trump, comments that at the end of the day end up being flip-flopped or walked back. Any sign Wall Street's going to stop engaging in what appears to be a kind of a boy who cried wolf scenario?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, when you have a market that is as sensitive as any time you even hear progress on talks happening, that's certainly not good for markets, because the idea as an investor is you want certainty. You want to know that an investment that you're going to make today is going to pay out in a month, going to pay out in a year, going to pay out in 10 years. And the problem is that even companies can't forecast what they're going to be making in the quarters coming up because of this tariff uncertainty. They don't know what the policies are going to be, let alone tomorrow. They don't even know what it's going to be in the next hour. So you have the likes of American Airlines that's pulling their 2025 outlook. PepsiCo announced that they would be cutting their annual profit forecast. So they offered a forecast but said it's going to be lower. United Airlines a few weeks ago saying, you know what, we don't even know what the outcomes are here. Let's have two different scenarios for what our revenue and what our business is going to look like in the coming months. So again, this is not an environment that's filled with any certainty. Investors are reflecting that. That's the reason why markets remain volatile. Although I want to point out today in early trading, think for the first 30 minutes, at least, it seems like things are relatively mixed across markets. It's a quieter Wall Street day than I'm used to seeing as of the last few weeks.
We started the show, things were in the green, but as we were just now talking, things have taken a dip, at least in the Dow, so we don't know
higher
where
on the
things
S&P, but
are going to end.
Anything could happen.
Well, and you talk about how things have been changing day to day, or in some cases hour by hour, in some cases, Justin, it could be minute by minute. I just want to recap all the mixed messages on China in the last 24 hours. First, yesterday morning, the Treasury Secretary said, quote, both sides are waiting to speak to the other. Well, then, shortly after that, President Trump said this.
Are you talking to them actively now?
Actively. Everything's active.
Has there been any direct contact between the U.S. and China trade at all?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And
every day.
Well, then, last night, Trump's economic director, he contradicted what we just heard from the president. Listen.
The president will announce when talks happen, if they happen. But it's clear that the president and our team are open to talks. The Chinese have signaled that they're open to talks.
Then just this morning, China says any claims about negotiations happening are unfounded. Justin, what is the impact of all this? Not just the immediate impact, but longer term, too.
Look, it's amazing. I'm an economist. I've been following this closely. And if you ask me where tariff negotiations are between the two great superpowers of the global economy, my answer is not only do I not know, but different people in the White House are saying different things. It makes it impossible. Look, first of all, for businesses, we rely on China for all sorts of inputs into our own production. They rely on us as well. It makes it hard for mums and dads at home. I was talking to a friend the other day who needs a new air conditioner, and he said, should I wait? Well, tariffs are 145%, and the president said that's about to change, so you should wait. But then the president said that maybe it won't change. And then the press secretary said it definitely won't change. No one knows what's going on, mate.
Exactly. No one knows. But one thing we do know is that there's a lot of uncertainty. There is already some damage being done. People are losing their retirements. Businesses are starting to turn away product. President Trump has already admitted 145% tariff rate is so high that China basically isn't doing business with the U.S. right now. Take a listen.
I haven't brought it down. I haven't brought it still 145. I haven't brought it down. I said it's a high tariff. It is a high tariff, but I haven't brought it down. It basically means China's not doing any business with us, essentially, because it's a very high number. So when you add that to the price of a product, a lot of those products aren't going to sell.
Brian, talk to us more about how Americans are already feeling the impact.
Well, I mean, I think Justin just hit on it, right? I mean, people that are trying to make decisions like buying an air conditioner are having to watch the White House press conference to see whether or not the policies are such that they should try to buy it now or try to wait. And I think that is just another layer of uncertainty that is very much similar to what Wall Street and a lot of these C-suite offices are facing as well. But I do think to kind of loop back to an earlier question that you had about whether or not markets are willing to engage in this boy who cried wolf game, I do think, though, that there's a fair point to be made about the tail wagging the dog in this scenario, because, yes, it is indeed the case that, Wall Street has been really, really whipsawing off of what we've been seeing out of Washington, D.C. But at the same time, it was the bond markets that appeared to maybe convince the president to pare back on those so-called reciprocal tariffs during those, discussions a few weeks ago, and maybe even suggest that the conversations with the retail executives of Home Depot, Target, and Walmart earlier this week maybe convinced them to also dial down the rhetoric specifically on China, given that so many of those retailers source from China. But I do think the question here is, can negotiations be had? I think another interesting thread here is that a lot of diplomats are in Washington, D.C. right now for those IMF meetings. So it's not that you really even need to get on a plane going all the way to Beijing to have conversations. There are people right up on K Street right now to have those conversations. So the door is open. That's what the Chinese government has said. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said this over and over again. The door is open if the U.S. wants to talk. The question is the United States, to put this in relationship terms, in the talking stage? We don't know.
Well, let's talk to Garrett about who they're talking to, because we heard from the White House press secretary in the last couple of days that there are some 18 written offers or proposals that have been presented. Do we know which countries and how far along they are?
I can't say with a cool Australian accent, but I'm going to put "no one knows what's going on, mate" on like a sign I can hold up to answer questions like these, because the White House is not being forthcoming about that kind of information, perhaps not wanting to raise expectations that they will get 18 trade deals. They're not saying who these countries are who have, they say, submitted these written offers. I think the countries that we know that there are serious trade negotiations going on with, really the two big ones are India and Japan. Obviously, the vice president was just in India. The president had hosted both leaders of those countries here at the White House before these so-called reciprocal tariffs went into effect. And I think that's why those negotiations are at more of an advanced stage than perhaps the other 16 to 18 that might have submitted some kind of offer, because there were already discussions happening. Now those discussions take on a greater urgency. But those are really the only two I can point to with any specificity and say, we know that there are specific issues being discussed by the right people to ultimately get to new trade deals.
Justin, speaking of that cool Australian accent, I do want to get some sound in here. This is with mega donor Ken Griffin. Here's what he said about Trump's trade actions yesterday.
The United States was more than just a nation. It's a brand. It's a universal brand. It was like an aspiration for most of the world. And we're eroding that brand right now.
Justin, we know President Trump cares a lot about branding and image. What's happening to the U.S. economic brand right now?
Look, let me tell you a story of a young kid growing up in Australia. I used to watch a lot of sport. I love sport. And whenever the Olympics are on, if there was an Australian, I'd cheer for the Aussie. But me and all my mates, if there wasn't an Aussie in the race, we'd cheer for an American. And this is not just a statement about sports. This is, Ken Griffin was right, it's a statement about aspiration. This was a country that people all around the world looked at and saw opportunity and amazing things going on. And we've lost that. Young Aussie kids don't cheer for the Americans anymore. To give a much starker example, after Trump threatened to take over Canada, he might have thought it was a joke. But if someone threatens to take over your country, it's not funny. They put billions of dollars into defence. Their relationship with the United States is forever wounded. And we can go a step further. Now, one of the things that really makes me angry here is the simple loss of credibility. Nothing that the White House says one day is true again the next day. Fair enough, it's good TV. But if we have an economic crisis, the real problem is we're going to have to rely on a Treasury Secretary being able to walk out and say, it's all right, folks. I can calm markets. We've got your back. This is what we're doing. But if he's already used up his full quota of lies for the year, he's not going to have that ability, and we're going to be prone to being to all sorts of economic shocks.
There's the chaos happening outside the White House, and now we're learning of some chaos inside as well. Garrett, we have this reporting that Elon Musk and Treasury Secretary Bessent had a shouting match in the West Wing over who should run the IRS. What can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right. This took place about a week ago and happened in a hallway near the Oval Office, the two going back and forth about the person who had then been tapped to lead the IRS. The IRS has had something like 4 different acting heads already in the Trump administration. It's been a bit of a hot potato. Bessent and Elon Musk disagreeing in that moment. The White House has since tried to put a positive spin on this, calling the disagreements a normal part of any healthy policy process. You know, this is a president who has liked, really throughout his public career, having his advisors fight and disagree and may the best idea win. And that seems to be the way the White House is casting this shouting match between Scott Bessent and Elon Musk from last week.
Garrett Haake, Brian Chung, and Justin Wolfers. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Joining us now, NBC News justice and intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian and MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Barbara McQuade. Ken, what are the changes being made at the DOJ?
Jose, one of the Justice Department lawyers I spoke to called what's happening a complete bloodbath. The Trump administration is changing the basic mission of the Civil Rights Division, the way it's operated since it was founded in 1957 to help uphold the voting rights of African Americans. And this is happening in 2 main ways. One, the DOJ has pushed out nearly all the career civil servants in management positions. These are people with decades of experience who have served under Democratic and Republican presidents, including in Trump's first term. Many of them were reassigned to jobs unrelated to their expertise. And second, the department's leader issued a series of memos last week that essentially abandon the division's long-standing priorities of enforcing laws prohibiting discrimination against minority groups. And instead, the memos say the division will now seek to enforce President Trump's executive orders, many of which focus on, frankly, protecting white Christians. Those orders include restoring merit-based opportunity, designated English as the official language of the U.S., and eradicating so-called anti-Christian bias. As an example, the division is now investigating whether Los Angeles is improperly withholding gun permits, and it has withdrawn several actions around voting rights and taken the opposite position. One lawyer told me they have been working there for 18 years, and they are now being asked to do the opposite of what they had been doing. And Jose, this did not happen in the first Trump term, but as we've learned across a number of fronts, this second term is much different.
And so, Barbara, legally, the administration has, I guess, the right to do this, or do you see that there are some legal issues involved in these changes?
Well, to the extent, Jose, that they are enforcing acts of Congress, then they have the ability to do this. But as Ken just said, some of these things are simply executive orders of the president of questionable legality. And so I imagine that some of these actions may be challenged in court to the extent they bring civil complaints or criminal charges. We will see them tested in court. I think the thing that's most distressing is that the Civil Rights Division has long been regarded as the crown jewel of the Department of Justice, a place where the Justice Department works to achieve the promise of America. And instead, it seems that now this shift has been made to try to send America back to a time before we worked to achieve racial equality in this country.
And you, I know, worked on civil rights cases during your time at the DOJ. How are these changes, you think, going to impact things?
Well, I think, number one, we're seeing some of the most experienced career lawyers in the division being reassigned to lesser responsibilities or leaving on their own because this isn't the kind of work they signed up for. So I think we're going to see a mass exodus of the kinds of very good lawyers that we've come to know at the Civil Rights Division. And I worry about who they'll be replaced with. The Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights clearly has a very different agenda, and one could expect that she will hire replacements in that mold. And then those people will be in that division for decades to come. So this could be the kind of thing that cannot simply be unwound with a new election, but may take a generation to resolve.
Ken, Attorney General Pam Bondi also announced grant cuts to a variety of organizations at the DOJ. What do we know about that?
Yes, Jose, we're told these cuts were recommended by DOJ, and they target groups that provide services to crime victims. And Attorney General Bondi has boasted about these cuts on social media, suggesting that they took aim at what she views as wasteful spending. And she cited gender-affirming care to trans prison inmates as an example. But we also learned that Bondi has already reversed some of these cuts, including one program that paid for domestic violence victims to bring their pets to shelters. And the National Center for Victims of Crime told us that the DOJ was revoking $2.8 million of its federal grant funding. And they said they would have to close a national hotline called the Victim Connect Resource Center, which helps crime victims to learn about their rights and options.